Hello, and welcome to another episode of PodcastDX, the show that brings you interviews with people just like you whose lives were forever changed by a medical diagnosis. I'm Lita. Ron will not be joining us today.
I've heard that he's taking up cage fighting. And I'm Jean Marie.
Nope, he's at work.
Potato.
Collectively, we're the hosts of PodcastDX. On today's show, we're speaking with Michelle Irving about autoimmune hepatitis, migraines, and vertigo. Michelle is a pioneer in the chronic illness space. She is the queen of the underworld. She comes from Australia. And she mentors women around the world to create lives filled with love, meaningful work, deep personal power. I mean, it's a beautiful thing that you're doing, Michelle.
Yes, absolutely.
And what is the weather like down in Australia?
So we're just slowly coming into spring now, and it's about to get warmer, which we're all very excited about after winter.
I'm sure.
Thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome. Thanks for joining our
Yes,
show.
We really do appreciate it. With the time difference and everything, it's always a challenge, but well worth it. We really do appreciate it. Michelle, can you start us off by telling us exactly what is hepatitis?
So hepatitis itself just means inflammation of the liver. And there are 3 different types of hepatitis. One is the viral hepatitis, which we will have seen lots of education campaigns around.
Mm-hmm.
The other one is a genetic condition that your liver inflames through the process of basically being with yourself because of the genetic disease that comes. And the third one is the type that I have, which is autoimmune hepatitis, which means that a protein in my blood attacks my liver as if it was an organ donation, which it's not. And therefore I get inflammation of the liver. So it's really important to have education about the 3 different types of hepatitis and to destigmatize all of them.
Right.
But in the end, hepatitis simply means inflammation of the liver cells.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Okay.
So autoimmune hepatitis is different from the other forms because it starts in your body?
Right. So I'm guessing the treatment modalities will be quite different.
Some yes, some no, but yes, it starts in your body and it's actually a protein that my blood produces, which yours may not, and that attacks my liver cells, and untreated, that will lead to cirrhosis. So it has nothing to do with lifestyle choices. It has nothing to do with any other factors, and the treatment for it for me is to suppress my immune system and give me the same treatment you would give a person who had had an organ transplant to make sure that their body doesn't reject the organ.
Okay. Wow. Okay. And Michelle, what symptoms first led you to seek medical care, and was it difficult for your healthcare team to make a diagnosis?
So I think this is the really interesting thing that not everybody knows about the liver. So firstly, if there's a problem with your liver, you're most likely not to know it until it's too late. And this is particularly the case also for non-fatty liver. So these conditions where the liver actually starts to deteriorate and reaches a point that it's not repairable, but you don't actually get symptoms till it's in that state. So I will tell you the reason that my condition was discovered is because of my vanity. I went to my general practitioner because I had dark circles under my eyes that makeup wouldn't cover. That was the only symptom I had.
Wow.
I was very fit, very well, yoga 3 times a week, dance class, walking to and from work. And I went to the GP and said, look, can we do something about these circles under my eyes? And at 35, that started a 9-month diagnosis process. And the reality is that it was a process of elimination, of testing me for a whole lot of other conditions, and a liver biopsy. And all of that led to a diagnosis of autoimmune hepatitis.
Okay.
Wow.
Yeah, that's incredible. Not the symptom you would think.
No, I never would have guessed
No,
that.
No, I mean, I picture like
No.
ascites,
swelling.
ascites, jaundice,
Right.
things of that nature. But wow, so that was a good catch
So
by
I've
you
never
and your
had-
doctor.
I've never had any of those symptoms ever. And I wouldn't have them unless the illness progressed despite we were treating it. So
Okay.
that could happen.
Sure.
But this is the thing about the liver, and that's what makes it an invisible illness. So I look very well to everybody,
Sure.
despite the fact that this condition is life-threatening,
Oh, yeah.
because people might think, oh, well, we'll just give you another liver. It's like, well, no.
Because your body's going to
It's
attack
not-
that
just-
one too.
yeah,
My bad's going to attack that.
Yeah,
Right.
and just stop at the corner store and pick up the
Right.
liver. No problem.
I do have a different question though. Since that was your only symptom, the dark discoloration under the eyes, did they catch it early enough that there was not too much damage to the liver?
They caught it pretty early, so there's no irreversible damage to my liver. So there's sort of a line, and if you go over that line, it's irreparable, and they're just trying to hold you off from the whole thing deteriorating.
Mm-hmm.
And if they catch you before that line, then you've got a much healthier chance. And so I'm still scanned regularly. So there is scarring of my liver, but it isn't cirrhosis yet.
Okay.
And so we're just managing that. And I've lived with this condition for the last 18 years now.
Wow.
Oh,
Wow, you're doing very well.
yeah.
And
Yeah,
I mean,
I
not
was
only
very young.
surviving, but really thriving. So
Right.
that's wonderful. Michelle, what would you say is the biggest misconception about autoimmune hepatitis? Or is it simply that no one knows that it exists?
I would say it's about 2 people in every 100,000, so about 25 per million.
Mhm.
So that makes it quite small. And in Australia, we've only got 25 million people, so we're a really little cohort. And I think the biggest misconception about it is, one, that it's viral and that you can catch it, which is not the case.
Mhm.
And the second thing is that I look so well. And so fitting into this category of invisible illness, and people will say, oh, you look great. And it's like, well, how I look is actually almost completely irrelevant to the condition.
Right.
And in particular, this education that we now have around the liver is that there's lots of conditions that can affect your liver, but you won't know until you've sort of crossed that irreparable line. So do keep an eye on things and make sure you have a great relationship with your general practitioner, so that you can see things for the liver by just doing blood tests, and that will give you some indication of what's going on.
Okay.
Wonderful advice.
All
Thank
right.
you.
And you say that it's not common, it's very rare. Is it genetic? Is there a genetic base to it?
No. They don't know is the answer. Like
Okay.
many things in the autoimmune space, it's we've got no idea
Okay.
is what that code for. What I can tell you is no one in my family has it.
Okay.
So it's not genetically passed, but there must be some sort of genetic process for my blood protein to
Right.
sort of act
Sure.
on this very
Sure.
unusual cycle.
Right.
Mhm.
But it's very curious. And one of the things about it, because it's so rare, they simply treat it in an organ transplant clinic. So there's just not enough research or anything to distinguish it, because they treat the outcome, they don't treat the disease.
Okay. And had you even heard of this before you received your diagnosis?
No, never.
Okay.
I was 35 years old.
Wow.
I'm now 51. So this was a life and death conversation people had with me when I was quite young. And the treatment for it was way more brutal.
Oh.
So the treatment had me in bed sleeping 18 out of 24 hours a day. And not on treatment, I was going to dance class and yoga.
Oh.
So this was quite a big journey, and I made some really big decisions along the way about quality of life and what was important to me.
Okay.
And I refused treatment at times because the cost was way too high.
Yeah.
What
Okay.
kind of treatment did you have to go through for this?
So the first time the rounds of treatment were firstly something that suppressed my immune system and prednisone, so heavy steroids
Oh.
to stop the inflammation. We tried and tested that for about 5 years. And I would basically, on treatment, I would be able to get up, get dressed, catch a train to the office, and then turn around and have to go home and sleep because my energy was done. So there came a point after letting them try and test for a while that I made the decision that they advised me without treatment, it would take 5 years and then I would be in a very serious situation. But because treatment was so brutal and just so like there was no life in it, I made the decision to take the 5 years and stop treatment and have a good life, and had a really big discussion with myself about a good death rather than this sense of actually I have to live this way and it's not actually healing or helping me. And so part of that conversation and what I worked out for myself is really informs my work with women, because there's a miracle process that happened. By the time we got to the fact that I had a biopsy and basically I met with the doctor, he said, "You don't leave this hospital without treatment today." And I was like, okay, we've reached an important point, and I'd made an agreement that I would do that. By the time we did that, there was a new drug.
Oh.
And that new drug didn't make me sleep 18 out of 24 hours a day. I've been on that drug since 2012, so 10 years. And I have a completely functional lifestyle on that
wonderful.
medication.
That's
That's
absolutely
wonderful.
So it's a
fantastic.
weaving path.
Yeah.
It's something we all go through, this sort of weaving path of where we end up.
And you never do know what's right around the corner.
Right.
Yeah, what they may discover, tomorrow. So
Yeah,
that's,
you hate to give up because tomorrow could bring a miracle.
Yeah, that is wonderful.
And this was a cancer drug.
Oh.
So this was a drug for cancer that they discovered worked for the liver.
Okay.
So, you can't predict
right.
where it's going to come from.
Right.
Well, yeah, we were talking the other day about how Botox was initially used by an eye doctor, and it was just like a, so you never know, what off-label uses they'll come up with. Michelle, I'd like to switch gears a little bit. Are your migraines and vertigo connected in some way to the autoimmune hepatitis? Or are those two very separate diagnoses that you have to deal with separately? And, well, I guess I'll leave it at that for now.
Yeah. So sadly, no, they're not connected. I'm not sure if that's good or bad, but they're a completely independent condition.
Okay.
But the vertigo and the migraine are connected.
Okay. Yeah.
So that diagnosis is called migraine-associated vertigo. What that means is I woke up one morning and fell to the floor with the room spinning, but the room wasn't spinning, but I was experiencing it as spinning. And that is where, if you have a history of migraines, then that can lead to, or it can be a precursor to having this vertigo condition. And just like you were talking about Botox, they discovered that Botox can assist migraines. And in fact, I have that treatment every 3 months, and that is what keeps me able to function and walk. So it was completely separate, and I got a refresher course in chronic illness.
Okay. All right. Yeah, Jean also gets Botox for migraine. So,
and I, along with nerve blocks and a slew of medications, I'm able to get through most days.
Right.
So that's good. And
do you have to supplement the Botox with any medications for your migraines?
And are you able to take?
Let me ask a question.
I'm sorry. Go ahead. Sorry.
So yes, there is medication, and they hit me. We had that much higher, but then as the Botox has worked, because it took me a couple of years to be willing to take Botox. That was another long decision. And I have never regretted it. Oh my goodness, it's magical. But I have a much smaller dose of a migraine preventative medication, and then that's it. The world just works for me in this way.
Okay. Now you can go ahead, Jean.
Well, I was just wondering, does the autoimmune hepatitis complicate and narrow down what medications you can take to prevent your migraines?
It hasn't affected migraines, but everything gets tested through
Okay.
my specialist before we put anything in my system.
Okay.
So one of the things that you can't take with this condition is iron supplements or anything. So all of that has to be done on the side
Okay.
through diet or any other process to the best of capacity. So the immunosuppressants, the biggest sort of risk in that process is actually of getting skin cancer, because your skin is the biggest organ that deflects against the sun.
Right.
And if you suppress your immune system, then those rays are just going to really love you up.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, we went through a whole course on liver transplants and
We
all the
actually
complications.
started this
podcast
yes. because of my cousin's liver transplant.
And how much we didn't know.
Right.
And we thought, who to get advice from?
Other people
Other
that
patients will have the best advice. And it's very practical advice.
Yeah.
And also hearing from someone who's been through it is just really wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Michelle, do any alternative therapies, such as you said that you like
yoga.
you like to do yoga, but such as like massage therapy, yoga, acupuncture, heat, ice, or anything else, help you feel more comfortable?
So sadly, once the vertigo condition arrived, I couldn't do yoga anymore because I can't turn my head upside down.
Okay.
So the condition is managed, but it doesn't mean that there isn't a flare. And so some days I'll wake up with vertigo and just have to ride out that day in bed just as best I can.
Okay.
But massage, because any migraine and vertigo condition, as you'll be aware, like your whole body gets tense. Like that's just a really appropriate and normal response for the body.
Yep.
So for me, weekly massage has helped to just release some of that tension, particularly from a migraine perspective. And then that has to be regular care because, of course, the process just continues.
Right.
And personally, I think one of the most fascinating things I found was that the autoimmune condition and going through such deep discussions with death and treatment and that, meditation really, really helped keep me calm and centered. However, when you have vertigo, the last thing you want to do is focus on your body symptoms because it'll just escalate it. So the tools I had for the liver did not work for the vertigo. And it took me, just to give you context, it took me 9 months. I was bedbound with the vertigo, and it took me 9 months to be able to even really walk again at all. And it's been a long recovery to the point where now it's occasionally like a few days a month I would get vertigo. But previously I would go to work with sunglasses with the vertigo, and I would feel like the room was sort of tilting, but I wasn't going to fall to the floor. So that's what happened. Those are my two sort of alternatives, and I've had to work out other processes to bring calm with the vertigo.
Did you notice that the vertigo symptoms were relieved also with the Botox, or only the headaches?
No, both.
Okay.
And so my whole body is quite sensitive to things. So I could feel within 8 minutes that the Botox relieved the vertigo. And I ended up having way more vertigo and not headaches. So I switched from having heavy migraines, didn't get the migraine pain, but got vertigo. And that's why they call it migraine-associated vertigo. You sort of switch from one symptom to another, and sometimes you have both.
Okay. All right. And Michelle, what are some of the less apparent parts of your life that are affected by having a chronic illness? And you've got multiple chronic illnesses. So what parts of your life are...
So the key... Yeah, I think the key things that are affected for me is one, how I navigate working, and I've really created a work routine for myself. And like many of us living with chronic illness, 40% of entrepreneurs have a chronic illness. And there's a reason for that, because we work out how to navigate our lives in a way that works for us and our bodies.
Mm-hmm.
The other things that have been affected is I entered relationship after the vertigo. So it's sort of just in dating, and that I could just
Mm-hmm.
walk or go to the park, but I certainly couldn't go out to noisy restaurants or concerts. And I still can't go to concerts or anything like that socially. So there's a mitigation in the level of social activity, like there is for so many of us.
Mm-hmm.
And those choice points about, okay, which social activity am I going to
Mhm.
save up my spoons for?
Yes.
Mhm.
And then what am I willing to understand if I go out and do this activity, to know that I'll be in bed for a few days?
Mhm.
Right.
So I would say work and just that social engagement that so many people take, in many ways for granted, which is absolutely appropriate if you don't have a chronic
Right.
illness.
Right.
Right.
Those would be the two areas.
Okay. That makes a lot of sense.
Yes.
And Michelle, what inspired you to start your podcast, The Pajama Interviews?
So the pajama interviews came about in a very funny way. What happened as I started to recover from the vertigo and return to an office job that I had is that lots of people started to come and ask my advice, because they could see that they'd heard I'd been unwell. I would come back to the office, but I would have a very strong sense of self, and I was really great at negotiating work boundaries. And so women that I knew who had breast cancer, who wanted to have a more positive approach to the possibilities in their life, but not have fluffy pink rainbows and sort of all of that woo-woo that at times comes with how you have to think positively to get rid of your illness, which is not my position at all. My position is really, how do we create a world in which we thrive and works for us and our bodies, and that is the component that we are working on.
Okay.
So as more and more people came to me, I made the decision to share with them all of the tools I had used and worked out for myself. And gradually that became a mentoring business that I now run with women with chronic illness.
Okay.
And in that process, I realized that we weren't having the conversations. There's some amazingly fantastic podcasts leading the way like yours in America, and which have been going for really quite a long time at this point. And there was not a broader discussion for me about all of it. And I was able to create a global summit that I run each year. And I interviewed high-profile women living with chronic illness in the US and Australia, as well as what I would think of as, you and me, who don't have necessarily a spotlight on the whole of our lives. And that summit then becomes the Pajama Interviews. So that's how it comes.
Okay.
And I called it the Pajama Interviews because that's what we spend most of our time in, our pajamas.
Okay.
Got it.
Yeah.
And coming from someone, myself, who loves a wonderful set of PJs, I have to ask you, do you have a special or a go-to pajama set?
Or brand?
Or brand or
I
or,
do. I have
or
a couple.
material?
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, so there's two versions I have of this.
Okay.
One is if I'm lounging and I feel well, I have a set by an Australian company called Homebody, who are also export to the US. And the other pair of pajamas are for those really comfy comfort days, and I spend most of my time in these. And they are the pajamas that Qantas Airlines, the Australian airline, give you internationally. And I have to say, they are so well known and well regarded throughout the world, the Qantas pajamas. If you can get your hands on them, they are fantastically comfy.
Okay.
So
Good
it's
to
worth
know.
flying to Australia
Just for the PJs.
just for the PJs. Yes. Okay. All right.
Now I know.
Adds to the reasons why we have to go to Australia.
That's the only reason.
Well, and wine tasting maybe.
Okay, wine tasting.
Okay.
Yes,
And the
definitely
beautiful
wine
scenery
tasting.
and the architect, everything. Okay. Just everything is worth the trip. But now we know the flight will be comfortable, which is very important because it's a long haul. Michelle, from what I've read, I understand that you use you were talking about spoons, and that's an analogy that's commonly used for how much energy one has when they have a chronic illness. But you're using Greek mythology as an analogy for chronic illness. Could you tell us more about that?
Absolutely. So, one of the things, to just be honest, that we all understand is that the story of illness that we have
Mm-hmm.
is really rubbish and is not very empowering for
Mm-hmm.
us. And, in the well-being and the health sector, there's a whole story of illness that you can think yourself out of this or take
Oh,
these treatments.
yeah. Mm-hmm.
And in that, what I think of as, the rest of society, the story of illness for everybody else is you get sick, you might get worse, but you get treated and you get better,
Mm-hmm.
or it does. That's just the way things are. But people don't understand the chronic nature of it. So, as we all know, they keep asking you how you are and trying to work out if you're better yet.
Mm-hmm.
When I was in this life and death conversation with the liver conversation, we didn't know if they caught it early enough to stop the illness progressing.
Okay.
What I did was I needed a different story.
Mm-hmm.
And I found that in Greek mythology. And I'm delighted to say that I found that on my own in 2012. And you may or may not know the fabulous writer Sarah Rami, whose book, A Lady's Handbook for Her Mysterious Illness,
Oh.
also found this same myth. And a couple of years ago, we discovered each other and
Oh.
were amazed and delighted. So the myth of Persephone is that she goes down a maiden from, heaven, so to speak, with all the other goddesses and maidens. And Hades, the god of the underworld, comes and takes her. And it's this sudden snatch, and she's down into the underworld. And we don't know much about her journey there on the way down or that descent. But what we do know is there's this negotiation with her mother and with Jupiter and Zeus. And what happens is that there's a negotiation and she comes back up from the underworld 6 months of the year. And in that process, what's most fascinating to me is that she goes down a maiden, but she rises the queen of the underworld.
Oh.
And that is this myth from maiden to maturity.
Mm-hmm.
And that it's actually the conversation with the underworld and her experiences that make her into her sovereignty.
Okay.
So she rises back up, and that is the Greek myth of, winter and spring.
Mm-hmm.
And then she returns each time, so 6 months of the time. And her job as she returns is to guide those who come to the underworld. What's critical about this myth that isn't in our logic in our modern day world
Mm-hmm.
is that the underworld is not hell. The underworld
Mm-hmm.
is the place where all the souls go,
Mm-hmm.
and that there are guides there to guide them how to navigate it and where to go and what they need. Now, the fun part about this myth is that this myth is 2,000 years AD. So in the Greek mythology, 2,000 years before we have our own counting of time.
Mm-hmm.
But actually, it comes from an older myth, which is 2,000 years before that. And that is a Sumerian myth. And in that myth, there's no masculine god of the underworld. It's two sisters, the queen of
Oh.
heaven and the queen of the underworld. And the queen of heaven goes to visit her sister. So that is the myth of Inanna, and there's lots of places to Google and learn that myth.
Mm-hmm.
But what I found for me is that in that Sumerian myth, the descent from the Queen of Heaven is that she strips things off. She strips off her power. She has to strip off her intuition. She has to release the life that she had before in all of these stages until she is down in the underworld and she is stripped down.
Okay.
And a lot happens in that myth,
Mm-hmm.
and then she ascends back up. And for me, that really described the journey of chronic illness, because you strip down your identity and you end up a patient in crisis. But there's a time where you have to look at the grief of the old world that you had, but that is not the end of your story. And that's why the myth is useful, because it will birth your sovereignty,
Mm-hmm.
and you will ascend with incredible power. And that process is what chronic illness to me brings.
Okay.
Okay.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Wow. Very deep.
Yeah.
Michelle, have you gotten any support from your family or friends as your healthcare journey has progressed?
I think asking for help or having help can be quite a lonely journey.
Mhm.
So for me, my family lived a long way away and it didn't have the level of connection to come and support me. So in many ways, I had to ask for help from those around me. I was so fortunate to have some mentors in my work who sort of stepped in to assist. And then I rostered friends when I couldn't go to the groceries or do that. I created rosters and had to ask people for help. And for me, who had been trained to be independent and had lived alone for 20 years and knew how to take care of myself, this was one of the most difficult things to do. But that in itself is created such power and such joy. And I was able to experience the level of support that really transformed my experience of relating with others.
Oh, that's wonderful.
I love the way you put that.
Yeah. Could you also tell us a little bit about your masterclass for emotional empowerment for chronic illness?
So we run, I say we because I've started to train women coaches in my work. So we're just finishing up a 7-week program called Emotional Empowerment. And what I've done is worked out what the tools for you practically are for your emotional process, because my work is, and I am so focused on your emotional well-being. You know, there's lots of stuff out there about your physical well-being, but emotionally, this experience can be very, very difficult. So we need some support that's appropriate. And for me, that support comes in knowing that there's a map, knowing how to navigate the different stages of chronic illness. You know, what's the difference between having healthy emotional empowerment when you're not in a flare and things are going reasonably well, to having emotional empowerment while you're in bed and you actually can't get up and do things for yourself. So I would say that you can have empowerment in both those places. You can be in what I think of as your sovereignty. You can negotiate in both those places, and you never need to apologize for your experience of illness. And that is the work that I teach women, so that you're an equal in all of these relationships. You're just having a different physical experience. That's all that's going on.
Okay.
All right. And with everything that's going on, how do you find time for self-care and establish a good work-life balance?
So for me, I really live what I talk, because it's the only way I know how to function in the world.
Okay.
I worked out how to live first before I taught anything.
Okay.
So what that means is that I teach this work and I run a 6-month program called Queen of the Underworld, and that's the deepest part of the work. But for me, what that means is that I only run one course of Queen of the Underworld a week, and I have a couple of private clients, but I take no more than 2 things on a day, and I only work 2 to 3 days a week. The rest of the time, if I choose to do something creative or, you know, the bane of my existence, social media, that is separate, and that only comes when I have energy. So that's how I've worked out how to work. And then I've had to work out financially how to structure that, right? Because that's the other part of the conversation.
That's true.
And what I have seen is that there are lots and lots and lots of ways, regardless of your physical health, for financial resources to come in and support you. And now what happens is, as women come into my work, we also find ways for them to open up new financial resources that don't tax their body. Because I'm all about work that works for you and your body.
Okay.
Good.
Yeah, that's
Excellent.
wonderful.
Excellent advice.
And Michelle, what advice do you have for someone who's been recently diagnosed with autoimmune hepatitis, and what is the best advice that you personally have received?
So the best advice that I have with somebody with diagnosis is when you look up the internet, it is very scary. Please know
Mhm. Oh, yeah.
that there are, lots of us living very, very well.
Mhm.
And there is an amazing Facebook group based in the UK called Autoimmune Hepatitis. I think it's called England or something. But have a
Okay.
look for the Facebook groups, because that is a very well sourced, well resourced, well researched Facebook group that is run out of a not-for-profit specifically for autoimmune hepatitis.
Okay.
The best advice I received in managing the condition actually came from a dear friend, because nobody in friends and family necessarily know what to say and do. And when you're very, very frightened, you don't need any advice about jollying you up or thinking better or anything.
Mhm.
So I was very, very frightened, as I have been at times. And my dear friend looked at me and she said, I don't know what your soul has in store for you or in this experience, but I'm 100% with you and will be with you as you go through this experience.
Oh, that's sweet.
And that was incredibly soothing and empowering. And it means I had company in the confusion, not people telling me what to do or think.
Mhm.
Right,
That's,
right.
That was very thoughtful.
That's perfect.
Mm-hmm.
Perfect. Well, Michelle, thank you very much for joining our show today. How can our listeners learn more about your master class, your podcast, and the empowerment programs that you're putting in?
So you can easily find me at michelleirving.com.au, and you will find me on Instagram at Michelle Irving Official, all one word.
Okay.
There's lots of things you can take there to just do as a home study, and there's also ways you can work with me personally. So everybody can pop over, and there's heaps of free resources there as well as the podcast.
All right. I'm definitely going to put a link for that on our website for you.
Absolutely. Well, and thank you ever so much, Michelle. And if our listeners have any questions or comments related to today's show, they can contact us at PodcastDX@yahoo.com, through our website, PodcastDX.com, on Facebook, Twitter, Pinterest, TikTok, or Instagram.
And if you have a moment to spare, please give us a review wherever you get your podcast.
And as always, please keep in mind that this podcast is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment, and always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified healthcare provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition or treatment, and before undertaking a new healthcare regime. And never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you've heard in this podcast.
Till next week.